And into this, we're going to be diving into Hue Hue Tlapallan and doing a little bit of research, figuring out what Hue Hue Tlapallan is from all kinds of different viewpoints, records, sources from all over the place, just to see what the description of Hue Hue Tlapallan is, as it seems to be one of the oldest names of America thus far in my research. So the first book that we're going to be jumping into is The History of Cooper County, Missouri by W.F. Johnson. So within this chapter, we got the contents of the mounds. By excavating these mounds, we find a peculiar instruments of the chase and hunt, vessels, bowls, and statuary, some with peculiar markings and engravings. Such mounds have been discovered throughout the country in almost countless thousands, many upon many. And they were here when the white man first set foot on American soil. Okay, so when they came, the articles found in them were unlike those used by the Indians, known at the time when those white men first appeared here. The same Indians lay no claim to having built these peculiar structures of earth, to hold no tradition that those who preceded them had built them. And some of the tribes claim traditions running back thousands of years prior to their acquaintance with the white man. So what's crazy right here is they straight up saying that, like, they ain't claiming these mounds, but they claiming being here for a long time. So what's going down here? That's what I be trying to understand in relation to, and these are, granted, this is only 1919. Here we are in 2023, where maybe we're having a misunderstanding in relation to who actually built these mounds, and claiming that certain Indians built these mounds, when actually at that time when people were talking to these Indians, they had no traditions or accounts of building the mounds. They never said or claimed that they built them. So that's a little mysterious to me. I don't understand why that's being put forth, but we'll continue. So the origin of mounds. These scientists reasons thus: first, the mounds are not natural formation. Of course, we know that. Second, they were built by man. Of course, yep. Third, the white man did not build them. Of course, yep. Fourth, the Indians did not build them. Therefore, it follows as a logical conclusion that they were built by a race inhabiting our country long before even the red man. Okay? This is kind of what's going on back then, what they're talking about. This, in fact, is the consensus of scientific opinion at this time, yet not all agree. Of course. Here now on page 36, it says the Indians found by the first white explorers did not recognize these mounds as belonging to them, either by occupying them or using them, or by their traditions. Although the surprising number of such mounds in some sections of the country, many of them were very large, singular in form, and conspicuous in the landscape, must have attracted the attention of the most thoughtless of men. Featherstone Ha was so impressed by these historic remains in Missouri that he concluded that they were to the tribes that built them what the pyramids were to the ancient Egyptians. Here, going into now the probable race of the mound builders. Okay, now this is again a little bit further back. We in 1919 when this was published. Don't know how long it took. To what particular race the mound builders belonged has been a subject of much discussion. Here we go. Look at that. Abe, who? This is the boy we've been reading on, okay? Brazer de Babar declares that the pre-Aztec Mexicans and Toltecs were a people identical with the mound builder. It is also said that the mound builders were of the same cranial type as the ancient Mexicans or Peruvians, and that the natives of the Pacific slope as far north as Sitka, that is to say, brachycephalic. And Winchell thinks that the identity of the race of mound builders with the races of Nahuatl and Peru will become generally recognized. Squire supposes that they belong to an extinct race. Atwater gives his opinion that the lofty mounds, ancient fortifications, and tumuli, which cost so much labor in their structure, owe their origin to a people much more civilized than our Indian, and Atwater was familiar with the capabilities and characteristics of the American Indian. Others again suppose that they were the same people who afterward came from the northeast into Mexico. Bancroft says that the claims in behalf of the Nahuatl races in the Mississippi region are much better founded than those which have been urged in other parts of the country. He asserts that the remains in the Mississippi Valley are not the works of the Indian tribes found in the country, nor any tribes resembling them in their institution, and that the best authorities deem it impossible that the mound builders were even remote ancestors of the Indian tribes. Now, do you see what I'm saying here? Atwater, Squire, and all these people are the people that are literally digging these up, creating the sketches, communicating with the Indians that are there present at the time, period, in which they are just now discovering these mounds. So again, I get confused when people are saying, oh, the mound builders are the Indians. I don't understand that thought. I'm confused, y'all. In his opinion, there was an actual connection either through origin, war, or commerce between the mound builders and the Nahuatls. This infers from the so-called temple mounds and strongly resembling the pyramids of Mexico, implying a similarity of religious ideas, the use of obsidian implements, the Nahuatl tradition of the arrival of civilized strangers from the northeast. And Baldwin, in reviewing the various traditions recorded by many of the earliest Spanish chroniclers of Mexico, concludes by saying that it seems not improbable that the Hue Hue, or Old Tlapallan, of their tradition was the country of our mound builders on the Mississippi. So here is where we get our first little description or understanding, mention of Hue Hue, or Old Tlapallan. Okay, so Albert Gallatin thinks that the works erected indicate a dense agricultural population, a population eminently agricultural, a state essentially different from that of the Iroquois or the Algonquin Indians. One remarkable discovery made by Mr. Thomas Beckwith, who has devoted many years to the careful and intelligent exploration of the mounds of the Mississippi country, would seem to tend to support the contention that the more ancient mound builders of the Mississippi Valley, at least, belong to the Nahuatl race of Mexico. The Marquis de Nedelec says that the Chimecs, who were of the Nahuatl race, in their wars used bows and arrows and slings, with which they flung little pottery balls, which caused dangerous wounds. Such artificial pottery sling stones, being uniform in size and weight, have the greater precision of aim, an advantage which is recognized by the barbarous tribes of New Caledonia today, where sling stones made out of steatite are used by the natives. The sling was an offensive weapon of the Aztecs, and the stones thrown with great force and accuracy. Okay? With great force and accuracy. Among the Mayas of Yucatan, slings were also extensively used, but as an offensive weapon, it is unknown among the North American Indians. As respect the traditions of the more northern races, there is the same choice of belief and alternative demonstration. The Olmecs, which were what he's stating here, the earliest Nahuatl comers, are sometimes spoken of as sailing from Florida and landing on the coast at what is now Panuco, whence they traveled from Guatemala and finally settled in Tamoachan and offered their sacrifices farther north at Teotihuacan. Now this is pretty interesting because, when they say, oh, we came off from a faraway land. Anytime people be putting out that faraway land stuff, bro, it could have just been from Florida. That's a faraway land to them at this time. You got to think about how much they really traveling. That's a long ways. Think about driving in your car. Well, they ain't driving no cars like that, bro. So that could have been their faraway land. Why it's got to be all the way on the other side of the earth? It could have just been from Florida over to Teotihuacan, y'all. Some of them were very likely Nahuatl forerunners of the subsequent great influx of that race, like the Olmecs and the Calancas, and may have been the people from the direction of Florida, of whom mention has been made. Okay, so here we go. Page 137. It was the Olmecs who found the Quinames, or giants, near Puebla and Cholula, and in the end overcame them. The Olmecs built, according to one story, the Great Pyramid of Cholula, and it was they who received the great Quetzalcoatl from across the sea, a white-bearded man. Dodge a hijack on that white, though. Could be pure, as the legends went. But again, we're going over Quetzalcoatl and what that truly meant. As the legends went, who was benign enough in the stories told of him to make the later Spaniards think, when they heard them, that he was no other than the Christian St. Thomas on the missions. When the Spaniards finally induced the inheritors of the Olmecs powers to worship Quetzalcoatl as a beneficent god, his temple soon topped the mound at Cholula, We have seen that the great Nahuatl occupation of the Mexican plateau at a period somewhere from the 4th to the 7th century was preceded by some scattered tribal organizations of the same stock which had, at an early date, mingled with the primitive peoples of this region. We have seen that there is a diversity of opinion as to the country from which they came, whether from the north or the south. A consideration of this question involves the whole question of the migration of races in the pre-Columbian days, since it is the coming and going of peoples that form the basis of all history. And this is so true because, again, we have to really put ourselves into the understanding of how much migration was actually happening. These people were traveling like with the sun. When the sun moved, they moved. You dig? They weren't staying in the winter times, bro, and suffering. They were moving. They understood, hey, we got to move our animals, like our livestock. We can't keep them here in the colds. Like, let's move and travel and migrate as the rest of the great world does in all of its majesty. In the study of these migrations, we find no more unanimity of the interpretation than other questions of these early times. The Nahuatl peoples, the Toltecs, Aztecs, Mexicans, or what you will, according to the prevalent views of the early Spanish writers, came by successive influxes from the north or northwest, and from a remote place called Tolan, Tula, Tlapallan, Hue Hue Tlapallan, as respects the Toltec group, and called Aztlan, as respects the Aztec or Mexican. Okay, so here we got a lot of references in relation to Hue Hue Tlapallan. So it says, C.F. Kirk and Prescott, it must be confessed that it is rather in the domain of myth than of history that we must place all that has been written about the scattering of the Toltec people at Babel, Bancroft, and their finally reaching Hue Hue Tlapallan, wherever that have been. The view long prevalent about this American starting point of the Nahuatls, Toltecs, or whatever designation may be given to the beginners of this myth in history, placed it in California. But some later writers think it worthwhile to give it a geographical existence in the Mississippi Valley, and to associate it with to the Mound Builders and their works. Okay, so we've been going through this in our Veil of Antiquity, which part 3 is coming up soon because we're diving into R.S. Clymer's works, okay? Bancroft says there is no sufficient data to determine the position of Hue Hue Tlapallan, but he thinks the evidence, while not conclusive, favors the south rather than the north, okay? The truth is about these conflicting views of the northern or southern origin, pretty much as Kirk puts it, all that can be said with confidence is that neither of the opposing theories rests on a secure and sufficient basis. The situation of Hue Hue Tlapallan and Aztlan is very likely one of the same question as looking to what was the starting point of all the Nahuatl migrations extending over 1,000 years. Now, here we go. Brazier, this is on page 138 because, we diving in Brazier's work right now too, though. But everybody else's, this by Justin Windsor, but they really hold Brazier to some understanding, good understanding. Brazier sought to reconcile conflicting tradition and Spanish statement by carrying the line of migration from the south with a northerly sweep, so that in the end a Nahuatl would be entered from the north, with which theory Bancroft is inclined to agree. Aztlan, as well as Hue Hue Tlapallan, by those who support the northern theory. See, in America, specifically the middle core Ohio Mississippi Valley, y'all, as well as Hue Hue Tlapallan by those who support the northern theory, has been placed anywhere from California Peninsula within the radius that sweeps through the West Continent and strikes the Atlantic at Florida. Atlantis, America, North America specifically, is also known, or better known in one of its most ancient terms, as Hue Hue Tlapallan. Okay, so we got in the support of the California location, Bushman, in his works that was released in 1854, finds traces of the Mexican tongue and those of the recent Californian Indians, linguistic resemblances to the Aztec, even so far as north as Nutka. Now, do you know where Nutka is? That's Oregon. That's Oregon. That's right at the entrance of the Columbia River. So we talking about as far as north, linguistic resemblances to the Aztec have been traced. But later, now Brenton holds that the Aztlan is the name wholly of a mythical purport which it would be vain to seek on the terrestrial land. This cradle region of the Nahuatl sometimes appears as the Seven Caves. Chico Mostok. Seven Caves. And Duran places them in Teotihuacan, otherwise called Aztlan, with a country towards the north and connected with Florida. And those seven caves can also be related. Others find them to be the seven cities of Cibola. So enumerates Britain. So now we're going to get into another book here, which is The Outlines of Universal History in 3 parts with a copious index to each part. It's by Joseph J. Reed. This was in 1862 is when it was published. So right here it says, there can be little doubt as to the high antiquity of the original population of America. The extraordinary number of languages spoken in Central America at the time of the discovery by the Spaniards proves either that the country was peopled from a variety of foreign nations or that the indigenous race must have been established there so long to enable the laws of providence relative to the multiplication and distribution of the human race, and to have come into gradual but full operation all on its own. Okay, there is no evidence that any considerable or varied migration took place from the old world into the new. There is no evidence that any considerable or varied migration took place from the old world into the new, although it is highly probable that adventurers from time to time found their way across from Africa to Brazil, and from Asia across Bering Straits, or through the Aleutian Islands, or from Japan to the western shores of America. We are therefore constrained to adopt the former hypothesis, and we may further assert that no subsequent migration has been of sufficient magnitude to alter the distinctive character of the indigenous population, meaning that it's indigenous here. The multitude and the variety of ruins found there, combined with the traditions of the past, all point to this region as the source of culture and splendor to which the Mexicans afterward attained. According to the ancient Tinzal tradition, the banks of the Tabasco and of the Usumacinta were the scenes of the wondrous works performed by Botan, the most ancient of American legislators, many centuries before the Christian era. These rivers flow into the Gulf of Mexico from the snowy chain of the Chuchumatanes, the Cordilleras of Guatemala. The ruins of Palenque, the most ancient of American cities, are still to be seen in Guatemala, and it is said that even to this day there exists amongst the Lancondons swelling between the Usumacinta and Verapaz populous cities, the last refuge of the ancient civilized Indians of Central America who preserved their religion and their antique costumes. In this region, Votan began his labors. He found the people savage and instructed them in the arts of civilization. That Votan was a real personage. There is good reason to suppose, but he has been elevated to the rank of God and of a mediator between the supreme being and man, and it is impossible to decide whether the attributes and the actions ascribed to him are all his or due to others of the same name. The analogy of the Tinzandal, the Quechua, and the Mexican traditions relative to the personages presented under the names of Votan, Kukulkan, and Guametes or Quetzalcoatl leads to the belief that they are one and the same person. One and the same person. All these are one and the same person. Mountains. A curious tradition is still preserved among the Tinzals, Zendals, that a subterranean road of prodigious length traversed the mountains. Subterranean road. A curious tradition still preserved among the Tinzals that a subterranean road of prodigious length traversed the mountains. Underground caves, bro. The roads, okay? And connected the temple of Tula with that of Palenque, and that it was dug by order of Votan. As to the era of Votan, there is nothing to guide us, but all American tradition refers to it as a very remote period. About the same time, another great chief and lawgiver named Zamna or Itzalmal arrived in Yucatan, accompanied by a number of priests, warriors, and artists. He established himself there and founded a kingdom into which he introduced laws, arts, and sciences. He built a city of Mayapan for his capital, and he divided his territory into large provinces which he granted as hereditary fiefs to the principal chiefs who had accompanied him, but subordinate to the Prince of Mayapan. The descendants of Votan sank into insignificance and some centuries afterwards succumbed to the Toltecs. The last of them, Chinix was hung and burnt by the Nahuatl or Toltec leader. Oof, tough. The annals of Mexico dwelt upon two facts. One, the arrival of a foreign race led by an illustrious personage and coming from the east. Okay, which we already was from Cuba. Watch out now. I ain't talking about far across the ocean. We talking about Cuba. The existence of an ancient empire known by the name of Hue Hue Tlapallan, whence the ancestors of the Toltecs or Nahuatls migrated in consequence of a revolution and after much suffering established themselves in the Aztec plateau. It is supposed that the last mentioned Toltec immigration took place either during the 1st century before or the 1st century afterward, the Christian era. These immigrants were termed Nahuatl, a word signifying wise or skilled, and their language became the predominant one throughout Central America. Now I want to pause there for a second because it's crazy that what we got going on is the name of Hue Hue Tlapallan, whence the ancestors of the Toltecs migrated in consequence of a revolution. What revolution do we know of that we just spoke of or read about recently? Rafinesquez was talking about it, the Atalans and the Coutons, right? The Mound Builders. And who came after the Mound Builders? The Ocusians. Okay, so you see that what possibly is going on here. Possibly, okay, that's all I'm saying. Possibly that we had the ancient Mound Builders all up north, middle of America, Ohio, Mississippi Valley, the Atalans and the Coutons, right? They had the Ocusians come down and pushed those people down, okay? Even further, okay? And that's where they became the Nahuatls or the Toltecs and Aztecs. From there, just grew on from there, right? Expanded over time. Possibly, don't know. Not quite sure. We're going to keep going, seeing what's going down, you dig? The illustrious personage who came from the east heading to the foreign colony above mentioned was styled Quetzalcoatl or Cucumats. Under him arrived in Tamoachan, where he founded the city of Zicalanco, which became one of the most flourishing cities in Central America. Now it also says he extended his influence into the neighboring empire of Xibalba or Palenque, okay, and attempted to conquer it, but in this he failed, and he then returned to the land whence he came. On his departure, the four leading chiefs, Oxmoco, Sapaxino, Trautetecui, and Zuchi Keoaka, convoked at Hue Hue Tlapallan the assembly of the Nahuatl nation and established the new calendar for astrological as well as astronomical purposes, which remained in use until the destruction of Mexico by the Spaniards. So what this is pretty much saying is the Mayan calendar could be possibly, okay, created at Hue Hue Tlapallan for the assembly of the Nahuatl nation, where they established the new calendar for the astrological as well as astronomical purposes. Section, it says, like all the other countries of antiquity, Central America had its giants, the Quinames, whose dominion extended over the interior provinces of Mexico, and Guatemala. Okay, what we talking about Mexico here is they talking about North America, y'all. That's, look on them old maps, you gonna see America was known as Mexico and Guatemala, but of whose origin and form of government we are ignorant. Okay, so they were a brutal race addicted to the grossest vices, but subsequently became partly civilized by a race whom they styled Olmecs and Zicalancas, and finally were exterminated by them at the solemn festival on the plateau of Huitzilopochtli. A few escaped, but their descendants were exterminated by the Toltecs some centuries afterwards, so the giants got demolished. The only reminiscence of them left was the name of one of their divinities, Tlaloc, or Tlaloro, who had also been one of their greatest kings. Contemporary with the Olmecs were the Mixtecas, called the Zapotecas, the Tontonacs, and the Otomis. Okay, so we're going to be in this Anares. It's a congressional international. It's about the Americanistas. It seems as though what this is in 1924 in Rio de Janeiro. Looks like a whole bunch of people got together and gave their opinions. Some in English, some in, all kinds of languages are in here. So we're going to go directly to Hue Hue Tlapallan and start right here, right? Let me get this bad boy translated real quick. So it says, Ferdinand Alva de Ixtliotzotl, descendant of the kings of Mexico, claimed to trace the entire history of his race. 7 families, according to him, were saved from the flood. The descending bears, after long and arduous journeys, settled in Hue Hue Tlapallan, a fertile and pleasant country to inhabit. Their stay was long and subject to varying fortunes. They were finally forced to leave their adopted homeland, the series of multiplied defeats, and that's why they went south. Oh no, that's a big one. They went south from where? Hue Hue Tlapallan, the Alagans, the Atalans, the Atlanteans. That's how it breaks down. Aspect that what we talking about? We talking about they came from the north. From where? Hue Hue Tlapallan. Quick little drop from Emmanuel Veleskovsky in Worlds Collide. Okay, so this is a recent publication though, so we're gonna jump right into it. He says on page 358, all Toltec histories mention an assembly of sages and astrologers that was convoked in the city of Hue Hue Tlapallan for the purpose of working on the correction of the calendar and the reforming of the computation of the year, which was recognized as erroneous and which had been employed until that time. So this is really important. Why is it really important? Because Hue Hue Tlapallan was so important that a group of assemblies of sages and astrologers was convoked. They were summoned into the city of Hue Hue Tlapallan. Why would such great majesties of sages and astrologers be convoked to an insignificant location? It's just not happening. In this book, Mound Builders of Ancient America, The Archaeology of a Myth by Robert Silverberg. And this is a really great picture as well. I don't know if y'all have seen this before. This is a depiction of what they say is a battle mound, okay? But either way, what you can see in this photo is pretty crazy. You see all kinds of things going on. All kinds of things. Spears, turbans. You got the slings going on, boys, with the slings. When they getting down, right? They on the battle mound. It's the battle mound right here. Who gonna reach the top? All they peoples at the top. It's crazy. So this is a wild picture right here. Jumping down into it, I want to start at this top of this paragraph though. So it says, though Baldwin has cited 3 Mayan pyramids as prototypes for the mounds, he chooses to relate the mound builders to a different Mexican people, the Toltecs. Like all the theorists, back to Benjamin Smith Batten, who had fixed upon the mysterious Toltecs as the authors of the mounds, Baldwin works from the manuscripts and codices collected from the Aztecs at the time of the Spanish conquest of Mexico. The Toltecs, he relates, quote, are said to have come into the country, Mexico, about 1,000 years before the Christian era. Their supremacy appears to have ceased and left the country, broken up into smaller states, 2 or 3 centuries before the Aztecs appeared. He quotes Arab's my boy, Brasier de Boborg, one of the protagonists of the Atlantis theory. America is Atlantis. On traditions establishing the existence of an ancient empire known as Hue Hue Tlapallan, from which the Toltecs or Nahuatl came to Mexico in consequence of a revolution or invasion, and from which they had a long and toilsome migration to the Aztec plateau. Boy, if y'all don't understand that the mound builders is Hue Hue Tlapallan, I don't know what else to say. Brasier de Boborg believed that Hue Hue Tlapallan, which he placed in the Mississippi and Ohio valleys, was a stopping off place for the Atlanteans after the cataclysm that drove them from their sun-dried continent. Baldwin ignores that point and simply asserts that the Hue Hue Tlapallan was the place where the Toltecs lived and built earthworks before they conquered Mexico. But earlier, Baldwin had said that the Mound Builders were immigrants from Mexico who landed on the Gulf Coast and spread northward up the Mississippi. So, to make his Toltec theory hold together, he has to postulate a double migration. First, in the really remote past, an ancient Mexican culture called the Coluas sent colonists to the Mississippi Valley. After a long residence there, during which they built pyramids and ramparts of earth, these colonies returned to Mexico. So much change in speech and in other respects as to seem a distinct people, and as the Toltecs conquered and ruled their ancestral country. To explain the departure of the Toltecs from the Mississippi region, he cites another Aztec tradition that the Toltecs were invaded by barbarous Aboriginal tribes. Who could that be? We've already spoken about it in Atala is America. When we've gone through Rafiniske's work, it was the Atalas and the Kutans, and who invaded them? It was the Oghuzzians from the north. Look at that boy, looking like Gucci Man. Y'all back up. Pottery head from the Siep Mound, Hopewell culture. Dodge the hijack with the Hopewell culture, cause ain't nothing Hopewell related at all. These the Atalans, the Kutans. This the Alaganes. This is Hue Hue Tlapallan. This the Kneeling Man out of Tennessee. Look at that boy. Ooh, like my boy Kermel say, do you remember? Watch out, man. He's cool. Look at that. Effigy's figure from Spiro in Oklahoma. It's right there near home, bruh. American Indian Hey Ya Foundation. Hey Yeah Foundation. So as we just continue to dive into more and more topics as we find them, we're figuring out all these kind of names that are all over the place for America. Who was before, who was after. You know, man, it's really intriguing and amazing to kind of dive deep on these aspects. But yeah, shout out to Hue Hue Tlapallan. Again, diving deep. Yo, peace and blessings, man. Y'all catch me on the next one. You dig?